There is silence that comes from institutions, and then there is silence that comes from a brother. They are not the same. Institutional silence is strategic, it is procedural, it is expected, but fraternal silence is intimate. It does not manage outcomes, it rewrites meaning. Prince William did not publicly confront Harry. He did not counter him. He did not explain himself. He did something far more devastating. He withdrew. And in doing so, he sent the only message that could not be misinterpreted. This wasn't a communications decision. It was a personal boundary. For most of their lives, William was Harry's stabilizer, not emotionally expressive, but structurally present. William was the fixed point, the older brother who absorbed pressure so Harry didn't have to, the future king who allowed Harry to exist without consequence. Inside the palace, this dynamic was understood. William held the line. Harry was allowed to bend. That arrangement worked, until it didn't. Because once Harry stepped outside the system, William faced a choice no brother should ever have to make: remain a brother, or become the future king. And unlike Harry, William did not hesitate. This is where the silence becomes lethal. William didn't argue because arguing implies symmetry. He didn't respond because response implies engagement. He chose distance because distance preserves hierarchy. And hierarchy is William's burden. Harry believed William's silence was temporary. A pause, a cooling-off period. But this silence was different. It was not angry. It was resolved. William stopped reacting not because he didn't care, but because caring publicly would have collapsed the boundary between brother and crown. Once that boundary collapses, monarchy fails. William knew this. Harry did not. For Harry, silence from the palace hurt, but silence from William destabilized him, because William wasn't just family. He was continuity. He was shared memory, shared trauma, shared survival. They lost their mother together. That bond does not fade quietly, which is why the silence cut deeper than exile ever could. This is the moment most people miss. William's silence wasn't punishment. It was recognition. Recognition that Harry was no longer operating within the same reality. And when two brothers no longer share reality, conversation becomes impossible. Anything William said would be interpreted as power. Anything he withheld would be felt as rejection. So he withheld everything. This is what leadership looks like when it costs you your sibling. William understood something Harry never fully accepted. The monarchy is not sustained by affection. It is sustained by restraint. And restraint often looks like cruelty to those who need reassurance. William could not reassure Harry without undermining the institution he has sworn to protect. So he chose silence. Not because Harry was wrong, but because Harry was irreversible. By the time the interviews began, William had already recalibrated. Harry was no longer someone to be corrected. He was someone to be endured at distance. That is a devastating shift for any brother to make, but it is final. Silence from a sibling tells you something institutions never say aloud. You are no longer reachable, and Harry felt that, not immediately, but gradually, when texts stopped changing tone, when intermediaries disappeared, when birthdays passed without acknowledgement. These were not accidents. They were signals. William did not block Harry. He let him speak into absence, because absence preserves the future. Every response would have anchored Harry emotionally. Every silence loosened that anchor, until Harry drifted fully into his own narrative universe. This is where Meghan's role becomes unavoidable. She didn't replace William. She replaced response. She became the only mirror left, and mirrors that do not contradict eventually distort. William understood that engagement would validate a dynamic he could no longer afford, so he did the hardest thing imaginable. He let his brother go, while still alive. Not publicly, privately. This is not cruelty. It is monarchy in its most brutal form. Because kings are trained to sacrifice personal bonds for continuity, William has been training for this since childhood. Harry never trained for abandonment. And when the silence became permanent, Harry finally understood something unbearable. The palace's silence could be strategic, but William's silence was personal. It meant the bridge was not burned. It was removed. And bridges that are removed are not rebuilt. They are archived. The public waits for a reconciliation that will never come, not because of pride, not because of anger, but because the moment William chose silence, he chose the crown over the brother. And once that choice is made, it cannot be undone, because a future king cannot afford emotional ambiguity, and a brother who needs response cannot survive without it. That is why William's silence matters more than anything the palace has ever done. It wasn't policy. It was final.